35-year-old Carla Stefaniak lived in Hallandale Beach, Miami, Florida. She was one of four children in her family and was born in Venezuela. When Carla was 19 years old, she moved to the United States with her family. They lived there until she turned 23, and then they decided to move back. But Carla totally fell in love with Florida and was happy to stay there on her own. She got a job at an insurance agency and made friends super easily, so she really didn't want to leave. Carla was the kind of person who always saw the glass as half full. She threw herself into everything that came her way. With so much energy and excitement, she was always the first one to say, "Yeah, I'll try it." Her brother Mario said that when she was a kid, she was constantly coming up with some wild, crazy idea. Her parents basically had to keep eyes in the back of their heads just to keep up with her. Her friend Greg said she had such a loud, vibrant personality, and it showed in everything. The way she dressed, the way she talked, literally everything about her. She was honestly unforgettable. Another friend described her as a passionate Latina woman who absolutely loved adventure. Carla was a dedicated traveler through and through. From traveling across Iceland in an RV and skiing in Switzerland, to diving into the non-stop energy of New York City, taking weekend trips to Cuba, Spain, and the Caribbean, she wanted to see it all. She documented every trip, shared her adventures with the world, and hoped that one day she could turn that passion into a full-time online career. Her brother Carlos was married to a woman named April, and Carla and April were basically best friends. Carlos would joke that his sister talked to his wife more than he did. They were completely inseparable. So when Carla's 36th birthday was coming up, it just made sense for her and April to plan a trip to Costa Rica. Carla mapped out the entire itinerary and planned every single part of the week. There wasn't going to be a single corner of that beautiful place left unexplored. On November 22nd, 2018, Carla and April flew to Costa Rica on Thanksgiving Day. They booked several hotels during the trip, and their final stop was supposed to be an Airbnb in a gated community in the mountains of Escazú, just 10 minutes from San Jose. It had gorgeous views from a private balcony, security, and even a pool. It honestly seemed like the perfect ending to an unforgettable trip.
How to welcome me for my birthday!
Carla and April spent every single day hopping from beach to beach, trying incredible food, and constantly posting on social media.
Second day, the hot springs.
On November 25th, Carla posted a photo by the pool on Instagram. From the outside, it really looked like this trip had turned out exactly the way they'd imagined. April was flying home a day earlier than Carla, so Carla had one more night to spend alone. The next day was her birthday, and as soon as she got back to Florida, her friends were already planning to take her out to dinner. On November 27th, at 11:30 in the morning, Carla hugged April goodbye at the airport. After that, an Uber driver offered to give her a tour around the city. She agreed and paid him in cash. Carla spent the day checking out a few more places, sending photos to her family, and buying herself a new handbag and some jewelry. The Uber driver dropped her back off at the Airbnb Villa Lomas, apartment number 8. Around 6:30 that evening, she started getting ready to head out to a jazz cafe. But a massive tropical storm was already rolling in, and it had completely different plans. November 27th, 8 p.m., Carla was sitting alone in the villa. She finished checking in online for her flight and arranged for the same Uber driver from earlier that day to pick her up the next morning at 8:30. Before her flight, she wanted to do a little shopping and grab something to eat. The storm kept getting worse and worse. Branches slammed against the windows while the rain pounded violently on the roof. The noise was honestly overwhelming. Carla sent a message to her family group chat on WhatsApp. "I want to go out, but I'm absolutely exhausted." And then, all of a sudden, everything went dark. The power went out across the entire complex. Carla texted the group chat, "It's raining really hard. The power's out. It's honestly super creepy." The electricity came back for a little while, but Carla was clearly scared, and honestly, who wouldn't be? The power outages, the awful weather, and being completely alone in a place she barely knew. She texted April, "Okay, the power's back on. This is seriously so creepy." Trying to calm herself down, she kept reminding herself that by the next day she'd already be back in Florida. It just wasn't the peaceful last night in paradise she had imagined at all. Her phone battery was almost dead, but Carla was still talking on FaceTime with a friend from New York. She mentioned that she was thirsty and he suggested boiling some water, but the only thing she had was a frying pan. Going outside in that weather felt way too dangerous, so she said she'd ask one of the security guards at the complex for a bottle of water instead. Around 9 p.m., her phone finally died, and the FaceTime call suddenly cut off. The next morning was her birthday, but there was still no word from Carla. Her Facebook was silent, and every WhatsApp message sent after 9 p.m. remained unread. Still, because of the massive storm and the power outages, it didn't seem all that unusual at first. Maybe she was just rushing to pack her things as soon as electricity came back on. At 8:30 that morning, the Uber driver arrived to pick her up, just like they had arranged, but Carla never came out. April called the villa to ask if Carla was still there, and the security guard told her that she had already left shortly after 5 a.m. with all of her luggage. Fort Lauderdale Hollywood International Airport, 5:30 p.m. Carla's flight from Costa Rica had landed, and her friends were waiting to pick her up and take her straight to celebrate her birthday. But she never walked off the plane. Sometimes the warning signs become impossible to ignore, and her family immediately contacted the authorities in Costa Rica. They were told to wait 48 hours. Carla was an adult, so they said they needed to give it more time. But her family kept pushing. If only they had known just how obvious it already was that something had gone terribly wrong. Eventually, the police agreed to send a patrol unit to the villa. The Airbnb where she had been staying was left extremely clean, and all of her belongings were gone. In fact, it was so clean that new guests had already checked in, which immediately raised concerns. If something had actually happened there, the crime scene could have been accidentally destroyed without anyone even realizing it. Police questioned the cleaning staff, and they said everything inside the villa looked completely normal and very neatly cleaned up. Until the full 2 days had passed, the police were pretty reluctant to do much more. Meanwhile, Carla's family created a huge group chat with around 60 people, and everyone was assigned a specific job. Some people handled calls with the police, others contacted Airbnb, and some focused on social media and reaching out to journalists. They got in touch with the Airbnb owner, and he said that after speaking with security, they were told Carla had supposedly left around 5 a.m. on the morning of her flight. According to the guards, she got into an Uber and left with her suitcases. But there was no Uber ride showing up in her account at that time, and there were no security cameras anywhere in the complex that could confirm the story. On top of that, her family was convinced none of it made sense. Her flight wasn't until 1:30 in the afternoon, and the airport was only about 30 minutes away. There was absolutely no reason for her to leave that early, especially since she had already arranged a ride with a driver she actually knew and trusted. The Uber driver Carla had spoken with said he didn't arrive until 8:30 that morning. He had never come earlier, and he definitely wasn't anywhere near the complex at 5 a.m. His statement was later confirmed. Carla's phone briefly reconnected to the internet at 12:17 a.m., around 3 hours after the FaceTime call had ended. But the phone data showed that the device itself never left the property. That was the last known location connected to her. Finally, Carla's photo started appearing on local news broadcasts, and an official missing person investigation was launched. 6 days after anyone had last heard from Carla, police officers arrived at the villa with search dogs. There was a strong smell of bleach and vinegar everywhere. The entire place had been thoroughly cleaned. Then investigators discovered Carla's blood, along with traces of semen on the bed and the floor. If Carla was still alive, one thing was suddenly very clear: she had definitely not left the complex willingly.
Ahora vamos a la Florida con la búsqueda desesperada de una mujer que literalmente se desvaneció
Missing in Costa Rica. We've just learned new details about 36-year-old Carla Stefaniak. Her family says there's new evidence to support their theory that Carla was kidnapped while on vacation. Our Gabrielle Shirley on this story, joining us now with the latest.
The family of Carla Stefaniak, who lived here in Tampa for about 10 years, tells us they have not heard from her since Tuesday evening. She was supposed to get on a plane and fly into Fort Lauderdale on Wednesday, but she never did. You can catch a glimpse of Carla Stefaniak's spirited personality in these videos, filmed in Costa Rica.
It says April's Day, but it's like Carla's Day too.
April Burton, Carla's sister-in-law, gave them to us. They took the trip together. She says she can hardly watch them.
It's just really hard because, you know, at the end of the day, I do feel, you know, guilty because I left earlier. So, you know, you start doing those what ifs.
April flew home on Tuesday. Carla planned to leave Costa Rica on Wednesday. She stopped responding to April on Tuesday night.
I told her I think my flight's delayed because I had a layover in Fort Lauderdale. And she said, that sucks. And then that's all I heard from her. And that was at 8:54 p.m.
April knows Carla made it to her Airbnb in San Jose, but she does not know what happened to her next.
We just know she's been abducted. There's no reason for her not to have had any contact with anyone. It's been 5 days.
5 days had already passed. What started as a local news story quickly turned into international headlines. A GoFundMe page was created to help Carla's family travel there, and the hashtag number #FindCarla completely flooded social media. Because of how hard people back home kept pushing, the U.S. Embassy started putting pressure on the government of Costa Rica too. The FBI eventually joined the investigation as well, and finally, the case started moving forward.
Went there the night before and left at 5 a.m. Everything's gone. She left with everything on hand.
Her family had no idea who she could have been meeting with. Now they were desperately reaching out to people through social media and pushing hard for the United States to get involved in the search.
Carla's brother tells us he bought a one-way ticket. He plans to stay in Costa Rica until he finds her.
Carlos flew to Costa Rica and went straight to the Airbnb as soon as he arrived. He spoke with one of the security guards there, but the guard said he couldn't help him. Nobody could give him any answers.
A woman has disappeared during a vacation in Central America, and her family is trying desperately to find her.
Adding to the mystery, the family says Stefaniak had checked in online for her flight and ordered an Uber to pick her up later that morning. In a press conference, authorities in Costa Rica said they're investigating the disappearance. Stefaniak's brother says he has personally contacted the U.S. Embassy and local law enforcement.
Do you feel like they're doing enough right now to try to figure out what happened?
We don't know. That's totally classified. They won't release any information. Seems like it's kidnapping, but it also seems like it could be human trafficking.
At this point, I mean, we have to be realistic. There's a lot of bad outcomes that are possible. We just gotta hope for the best.
Florida Senator Marco Rubio's office has reached out to assist the family. CBS News contacted the U.S. Embassy in Costa Rica and law enforcement there, but we have yet to hear back. Airbnb had no comment. Uber says it will assist the authorities. Nora?
All right, we're thinking of her and her family. Thank you, Manuel.
More than a week had passed, and while everyone back home was constantly checking their phones and endlessly refreshing the news, the worst fears in Costa Rica were starting to come true. Around noon, in the area of San Antonio de Escazú, search dogs reacted to something in a wooded area. There, investigators discovered the body of a woman that had already started to decompose. She was partially undressed, half buried, and wrapped in plastic. The location was only about 300 meters from the complex where Carla had been staying. Although dental records still needed to be checked to officially confirm her identity, the media was already reporting the news and everything pointed to the body being Carla.
News right now, a family fearing the worst is now in Costa Rica. Authorities working to figure out if a woman with Tampa ties is the victim of a murder.
Tonight, her family posting on social media that they are asking for prayers after a woman's body was found very close to where that tourist had rented an Airbnb.
Carlos later said that the second he got the phone call, he already knew. He didn't need any official confirmation. He looked up at the sky and just broke down crying. Deep down, he knew it was his sister.
A breaking news update to a story that has made national headlines. A Tampa Bay family's worst fears confirmed.
I will not lose too long, big long of my life. My mom, Carla.
Very, very sad for this family, but the father and her brothers and that family of friends say they are grateful for everyone for their support and prayers over the last couple of days. They're now working to get her body moved to Tampa so they can start funeral arrangements. Reporting live in the Satellite Center, JJ Burton, ABC 3. Action News.
Near the place where the body was discovered, investigators also found her phone, passport, laptop, and suitcase. The cause of death was a severe blow to the head, along with multiple stab wounds. Her hands and neck were covered in injuries, her jaw had been dislocated, and her neck was broken. A forensic expert said the knife entered her back with such force that 2 of her vertebrae were fractured. The injuries on her body and the DNA found underneath her fingernails showed that she fought brutally for her life until her very last breath. Her final moments happened in an isolated area without electricity during a massive storm where any screams for help would have just disappeared into the sound of the weather. It was an absolute nightmare. Police said the motive was likely sexual in nature, especially because of the semen found inside the Airbnb. However, the detailed forensic results regarding sexual assault were never officially released to the public. It appeared that Carla died sometime around 10 p.m., only a few hours after she went to ask one of the security guards for water. Everyone connected to the apartment or anyone who had been nearby was questioned over and over again. The Airbnb owners were also reportedly fully cooperating with investigators. Police questioned one of the security guards who was assigned to watch over apartment number 8, the villa Carla had rented. He even lived in the building next door. Besides the fact that his hands were covered in fresh scratches, his conflicting statements immediately raised suspicion. 32-year-old Bismar Espinoza Martinez first claimed he saw Carla getting into an Uber. Then he changed his story and said he had been asleep, didn't know anything, and hadn't seen her at all. The more police talked to him, the more tangled and inconsistent his story became. And the more investigators questioned him about the whole 5 a.m. story, the clearer it became that everyone had originally heard that version from Bismar himself. Nobody else could confirm it. Carla's banking activity didn't support the story either, and the autopsy later showed she had died long before 5 that morning. Bismar had full access to her villa, the other rental units, and the surrounding property, an area outsiders couldn't easily enter. That was also the exact area where Carla was found. Not long after that, police arrested the 32-year-old man. Later, his DNA matched the evidence found underneath Carla's fingernails and throughout the villa. Investigators also learned that after Carla was killed, Bismar allegedly called his wife and told her what he had done. Bismar was originally from Nicaragua and had only been in the country since June, just a few months before this tragedy happened. Police stated that he had an irregular immigration status, meaning he was in the country without official legal authorization. The director of the Judicial Investigation Police, Walter Espinoza, said, "This is a difficult case, a very difficult case. Solving it is extremely important for the country, for the victim's family, and for society as a whole." Carlos said he couldn't believe it. He had stood next to this man, shaken his hand, and even thanked him for helping with the search. Bismar had seemed so calm the entire time. Later, Bismar was charged with simple homicide, which is basically the equivalent of second-degree murder, because investigators believed there wasn't enough evidence to prove first-degree murder. For a first-degree charge, prosecutors would have needed to prove the crime was planned in advance or involved other aggravating circumstances, and that was something police couldn't say with absolute certainty.
An update on the case of an American tourist found murdered in Costa Rica while on vacation. ABC Action News reporter Michael Paluska just talking to Carla Stefaniak's brother. He joins us live in the Satellite News Center with the very latest. And Mike, this doesn't sound like good news.
Jameson, it's not good news for the family. They tell us that they are outraged because Carla Stefaniak, suspected killer at this point, has only been charged with simple homicide. And what that translates to in our legal system is just second-degree murder.
We know that this is not going to change anything, but we want this monster to be in jail for as much time as possible. What we want to do is just spread the word about what's happening in Costa Rica. Unfortunately, American authorities don't have any jurisdiction in Costa Rica, so all we can do is spread the word and try to make this new viral and put some pressure on the Costa Rican authorities to make a better job, do a better job.
As you heard them, they're hoping that Costa Rican authorities will hear their protests here in the United States and maybe change that to a first-degree murder charge. Caicelo told us the next step in all of this is to get a trial date that has not been set. We're live in the Satellite News Center tonight. Michael Paluska, ABC Action News.
While all of this was happening, both Airbnb and the residential complex also came under heavy scrutiny. There were no requirements for employee background checks, and apparently nobody had asked questions about Bismar's criminal history. His attorneys continued insisting on his innocence all the way up to trial, arguing that the investigation had supposedly been mishandled and contaminated. And then, in 2020, Bismar finally stood trial.
The trial is underway in Costa Rica for the man accused of killing a Florida woman on vacation.
Monday, the trial began for Bismarck Espinoza Martinez, seen here from inside a Costa Rican courtroom. But Stefaniak's family and their attorneys have reason to believe he wasn't the only one involved.
She fought really hard, according to the forensics. And we just don't believe that nobody heard or saw anything.
Prosecutors previously upgraded the charges from second-degree to first-degree murder after pressure from Stefaniak's family. If convicted, we're told Espinoza Martinez faces up to 66 years in prison.
Costa Rica doesn't use a jury system, so the trial, verdict, and sentencing were all decided by a panel of 3 judges. Although the charges were eventually upgraded to first-degree murder, he was ultimately acquitted on that charge and found guilty only of simple homicide. Now, prosecutors were asking for the maximum sentence allowed for simple homicide up to 18 years in prison. Meanwhile, Carla's family pushed for a much harsher punishment and additional charges as well, including robbery and attempted sexual assault.
The man accused of murdering Carla Stefaniak has been found guilty. This is according to Costa Rican newspaper La Nacion. Bismarck Espinoza Martinez was sentenced to 16 years in prison.
3 judges sentenced Bismar to 16 years in prison. Carla's family also filed a civil lawsuit against Airbnb and the Villa Lomas resort where the Airbnb property operated. The lawsuit claimed that they had been negligent by failing to conduct any background check on the employee and by taking no steps to determine whether Martinez was actually fit to have the level of authority, control, and access that had been given to him.
We are very hopeful that by prosecuting this action, it will force Airbnb to take greater action to protect its customers.
Their attorney argued that Bismar wasn't even legally allowed to work there in the first place, and yet he had been given his own apartment inside the complex, an apartment that just so happened to be right next to Carla's villa. The lawsuit stated that the harm caused to Stefaniak by Martinez was a foreseeable and well-known risk within that industry. Bismar's job included free access to employee housing and a master key that opened every room in the complex.
He was provided a uniform, giving him the cloak of authority. He was given unfettered discretion to go anywhere he wanted within the premises, and he shouldn't have been there to begin with.
Airbnb was accused of essentially allowing property owners to operate outside the laws and regulations that normally apply to traditional hotels and tourist resorts. Critics argue that the platform had created a system where vacation rentals could function without the same level of oversight, screening, and accountability people usually expect from the hotel industry. At the center of these accusations was the issue of safety. Carla's family and their representatives said that travelers trusted the platform because they believed the properties listed there were properly monitored and met at least basic safety standards. But after the tragedy, serious questions started being raised about how carefully the properties, staff, and guest conditions were actually being vetted. The lawsuit stated, although Airbnb published positive and glowing reviews about the resort and its owners, there had been numerous guest reports going all the way back to 2013 describing a completely different experience. In those reviews, people talked about disturbing situations, conflicts, and incidents where they claimed they became victims of employees connected to the resort. Despite that, the public image continued to be dominated by promotional material showing this safe, carefree vacation atmosphere. Later, it became known that Airbnb had removed some of those stories from its advertising and promotional content. For many people, that became another deeply troubling part of the case, because negative guest experiences had apparently existed for years, but were almost invisible compared to the resort's polished public image. That's why, after Carla's death, attention started shifting not only toward the crime itself, but also toward the way massive platforms manage and control information about the places they promote to travelers around the world.
The villa didn't warn guests about safety concerns from the U.S. State Department. One could argue if that's the company's responsibility or the customers.
A business owner cannot stick his head in the sand like an ostrich and pretend he doesn't know about a dangerous condition.
Airbnb mentioned nothing about being sued after my request for a statement. A spokesperson expressing heartbreak for the family.
An apology is nice, but action is more important.
Carla's family also repeatedly said they believe more than one person may have been involved in hiding her body. That theory came up not only in interviews and public statements, but was also specifically mentioned in the lawsuit for her loved ones. Too many details in the case felt contradictory and deeply unsettling to believe that everything had been done by just one person. Her friend Greg agreed with that completely. He openly said it was hard for him to imagine one person alone being able to kill Carla, move her body, hide the evidence, and still somehow clean everything up before the next security shift started. Especially considering the timeline discussed during the investigation. All of it only added to the feeling that there were way more questions than answers left behind. Who else could have been involved, if anyone at all, was never publicly confirmed. And that uncertainty continued haunting Carla's family and everyone who closely followed the case for years. In the end, Bismar and Villalomas were ordered to pay Carla's family a little over $50,000 in civil compensation. The ruling was meant to serve as at least some formal acknowledgement of responsibility, but for Carla's loved ones, no amount of money could ever change what happened that night. At the same time, that was a ruling from the Costa Rican court system, not part of the American lawsuit against Airbnb. That's an important detail people often forgot during public discussions about the case. The lawsuit itself never ended with a detailed public verdict, and there's no publicly available information showing that Airbnb officially admitted responsibility or that a court ordered the company to pay the family a specific amount of compensation. Most likely, the case was settled privately without major public statements, without detailed explanations, and without an openly published final decision. For large companies, that kind of quiet resolution is actually pretty common, especially in cases that attract intense media attention and public scrutiny. The listing for the property was eventually removed from the platform as well. After everything that happened, even the mention of that place no longer made people think about vacations or travel. It became connected to a tragedy that shocked thousands of people. Even today, Carla's case still raises difficult questions about safety, accountability, and the quality of investigations in countries that feel unfamiliar to us. Especially when people travel alone, trusting services, security systems, and environments they don't truly know much about. By the way, her disappearance happened only a few weeks after Costa Rica's tourism board launched a new campaign focused on tourist safety, and for a lot of people, that timing felt especially chilling. Against the backdrop of advertisements promising peaceful and safe vacations, Carla's story suddenly felt even more disturbing and heartbreaking. For most travelers, nothing bad ever happens until one night, in one place, when everything suddenly goes wrong. Sometimes, all it takes is a few minutes, one bad decision, or one dangerous person nearby for an ordinary trip to turn into a story people will still be talking about years later in the news and documentaries. After Carla's death, attention wasn't focused only on the man who killed her, but also on the entire system surrounding him, the complex itself, the level of security there, and the platform that made the stay possible, Airbnb. People started asking not just questions about the killer, but whether this tragedy could have been prevented much earlier. Carla didn't go to Costa Rica looking for danger or risk. She was simply doing what she loved most, traveling, discovering new places, experiencing another culture, and celebrating another important moment in her life. This trip was supposed to leave her with memories of the ocean, relaxation, and new experiences, not become the final chapter of her story. She was supposed to be safe. She was supposed to come home with stories she couldn't wait to share with her family and friends, celebrate another year of her life loudly and happily, make new plans, and keep traveling the world. Instead, her name ended up in news headlines, court documents, and lists of the most widely discussed true crime cases that still leave behind this heavy feeling of anxiety and injustice even now.